The Gospels tell us that sometime after his meeting with John the Baptist, Jesus went off by himself to spend 40 days meditating and fasting in the desert.
We do know that people can indeed fast for 40 days or more, as long as they have water.
The Gospel stories also say that during this time, Jesus was tempted by the devil.
We also know that fasting brings about alterations in consciousness,
which is about as speculative as historians want to get when discussing the meeting with the devil. What does seem clear from the Gospels is that after spending time in the desert, Jesus headed back north to the Sea of Galilee, and so we headed there as well. The sea is actually a large lake which flows into the Jordan River on the border with Syria. The Gospels say that Jesus came here after Herod Antipas had put John the Baptist in prison. What would have been the population around here in the first century?
There were a whole string of little villages around the lake, each one with perhaps a population of, say, 400 or 500 maximum.
And is this where Jesus, you think, first tried to make his mark as a preacher?
Yes, that he had been preaching as an assistant to John in the south. He came north after John was arrested because he was now head of the Baptist movement.
The Gospels depict Jesus moving from village to village, gathering followers from among the fishermen here, preaching what he must have known was a dangerous message.
What he talked about is the kingdom of God. That's what most scholars, 99.9% scholars will tell you, that's what we're sure about. Jesus talked about the kingdom of God.
And when he would talk about God's reign and God's kingdom, God's empire, this is language that is potentially explosive because it has political overtones. And there must have been a lot of people, maybe some ears around the corner, in fact, that were listening too.
This is the kingdom movement, which means king of the Jews. Oh, wait a minute, there is a king of the Jews just up the street.
Herod Antipas.
Herod Antipas. And he doesn't enjoy having rival kings around.
And Herod Antipas, the local king, had a way of dealing with people who preached about the kingdom of God. As Jesus was beginning his ministry, Herod Antipas cut off John's head. This potential danger may be why Jesus is described in the Gospels as moving around all the time. He seems to have spent a lot of time here in a town called Bethsaida. It was just outside the territory of Herod Antipas.
This was in the territory of Trachonitis. That's not a disease. Right. It was a place. Right. And so this would have been outside of Herod Antipas. He wouldn't have been reachable here.
Elizabeth McNamer has led the group of volunteers who've been excavating at Bethsaida.
It was a bordered town, and it seems to me that any time Jesus himself felt threatened, he would just hop over the border.
It was safer here.
Yes, yes, yes. Read in Luke, after the beheading of John the Baptist, where did he go? To Bethsaida.
But what would he have been afraid of?
Well, I suppose afraid of losing his own head.
It must have been a real challenge for Jesus to get his message across without inciting the authorities. That is probably why he told little stories which were symbolic and subversive. In the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. It is the smallest of seeds, but when it grows, it becomes a shrub where birds can make their nests." Now, this is a mustard shrub, so you can see that Jesus is not really describing a beautiful paradise filled with lovely trees. A mustard plant is actually a nasty weed.
Watch out for mustard. If it gets into your fields, you may not be able to control it. So the kingdom of God is likened to a very weird thing. It's useful, but it's dangerous.
We know that the parable of the mustard seed is not gardening advice. He is speaking about the real world out there, telling a story, but he doesn't mean literally what he says.
And when Jesus was asked to define this and describe this, he never quite gets around to that. And he tells stories and kind of hints around at this and hints at that and plays games with people.
It's a way of saying, you're not going to catch me out. I'm going to tease you with this, and then I'll leave you puzzling it out and I'll be on in the next village before you can come back.
Think how revolutionary these words must have sounded to the struggling peasants of the Galilee. Blessed are the poor, the kingdom of God belongs to you. Blessed are you who hunger now, you shall be filled. And this, woe to you who are full now, you shall be hungry. The people in his audience would have little trouble imagining who Jesus was talking about. Remember, in the Galilee, we think there were just a handful of wealthy families, Herod Antipas and his circle, who were getting rich while the peasants were being taxed off their lands. In fact, if you were a first-century Galilean peasant, a lot of what Jesus said would probably have meant something very different to you than it does to us today.
Most people, when they hear this phrase about turning the other cheek, they think it means basically that you've got to be a doormat for Jesus, to be a wimp, just to lie down and take whatever comes to you.
Tom Wright is talking about the passage where Jesus says, if someone slaps you on your right cheek, offer him your left.
In those days, people in that culture only ever used their right hand for doing anything in public. And so to hit somebody on the right cheek would involve hitting somebody with the back of the hand. And hitting somebody with the back of the hand is demeaning. It says you're an inferior and I'm dismissing you and I'm treating you as a piece of dirt. But then if the person who is hit turns the other cheek, the left cheek, the only way that you can hit the left cheek with the right hand is with a blow like that. You can't do it with the back of your hand, you twist your arm out of shape. And to hit somebody like that is a very different thing socially and culturally. Instead of saying, you're an inferior, you're a piece of dirt, it's saying, you're my equal, and I have to regard you as a fellow human being. So that turning the other cheek cuts the aggressor down to size. You may still get hurt, you may still be knocked unconscious, but you cut the aggressor down to size and you bring the person who is in the position of weakness back up to human dignity again.
What the Gospels don't say, but other historical documents tell us, is that Jesus, along with John the Baptist and the warrior monks of the Dead Sea sect, were just three of many different groups within Judaism with different ideas of what to do to bring about God's kingdom on earth. Now stop for a second and think again about first century Palestine. Jesus, John the Baptist, the people of Qumran, and others advocating violence within Judaism were all preaching against the power of the authorities. It was a very turbulent time.
Many, many Christians believe that Jesus planned to start a new religion. True?
No. Jesus was part of many movements within the first century Judaism which were trying to resist the military imperialism of Rome. One more group elbowing one another, to be sure, for the leadership of their people. Starting a new religion? No, that's not what anyone is thinking of.
Your description of Jesus, your analysis of Jesus is very much as a political figure.
You couldn't distinguish those in the first century. Politics and theology, religion and economics were totally, inextricably intertwined.
What Jesus is then saying is, yes, this is the time when all that stuff is going to be fulfilled, but it's going to look significantly different from how you think because of who God actually is, and the God that you actually have is not a God who's going to blast everyone else to smithereens with your revolution.
The Gospel stories describe Jesus impressing his followers by performing supernatural feats, walking on water, turning water into wine, and feeding thousands of people with just a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. But most scholars we talk to think these stories were invented by the Gospel writers as advertisements for Christianity in its early years. Christianity, after all, was competing for followers with Judaism and with Greek and Roman pagan religions.
Moses feeds a multitude in the wilderness, just as Jesus feeds a multitude in the wilderness. Jesus walks on the water, just as the Greek god Poseidon rides his chariot over the water. That's his miracle. Jesus changes water into wine, just as the Greek god Dionysus, as his chief miracle, changes water into wine. And the message of the New Testament Gospels really is that Jesus can do the same kind of good stuff that Poseidon and Dionysus can do. So those stories really are adopted then and adapted to the figure of Jesus.
But many scholars do believe the Gospels when they say that as he moved from village to village preaching, Jesus also healed and drove demons out of people. In the first century, sick people were thought to be possessed by evil spirits.
Did Jesus really heal people?
This is one of the more interesting of the issues that scholars face. And sometimes scholars who are embarrassed by televangelists and by exorcisms and healings on a stage or on television might shy away from these kinds of accounts. The fact of the matter is we have lots of stories of healings and exorcisms in the New Testament and early Christian literature, and we've got to face those in an honest and forthright kind of fashion.
So go ahead, do that for me.
I'll try. You see, I'm bluffing here. I'm trying to get away from it just as my colleagues do.
But did Jesus really heal people, and how did he go about it?
My hunch is this. I think that Jesus was understood to be a faith healer and an exorcist. There is a world in the first century that we may not know much about, a world of magic, a world of exorcism, a world of healing. That was a very important world for many people, many of the ordinary folks. This is where the religious rubber hit the road. What can your religion do for me, people said, in terms of my illnesses, my diseases, my hurts, my children who have died? What can religion do for me in that case?